I use a lot of tools. To name some would be After Effects, Blender, and even Maya. The hardest part would be, I think, getting the asset out of the game, and then you have to re-rig it, UV and light, animate, all those stuff.
I used Sony Vegas only so far. That's about it. Well, I mean, like Audacity to do for the audio parts as well, to like import, export, record, stuff like that. And then I used Google Documents, I guess, to write up the script and to send it over to Radlock, and then Radlock used Audacity as well to record it and send it back over. So other than that, in terms of like video editing, yeah, just Sony Vegas. I think I never had the chance to use After Effects, and I don't own Premiere Pro, although I want that to change soon. So
Yeah, so with regards to my end, the tools I used were Adobe Premiere, After Effects, and Maya. So Maya was used to kind of get the assets out of Star Citizen and into a format I can use, and that's all it was really used for. In the past I'd use it for animation, but in this case it was used to kind of edit the assets that I needed. Good example of this would probably be the I've got a constellation, but it's not a full constellation, it's only kind of the undercarriage, which I needed for a launch. So what I did, I'd take the constellation, I'd trim off the bits I don't need, and import those into After Effects. And in After Effects itself, the biggest tool we used was a plugin called Element 3D. And for anyone that doesn't know what that is, it basically adds a 3D engine into After Effects. And like it was probably the thing I used the most. Into everything you see in the video is based in Element. I think that's pretty much all the tools we used. Another plugin called Optical Flares, which is it's amazing. It's just like a lens flare generator, and it's even got a preset called the JJ, which I've hidden somewhere.
What was I doing again? Oh right, the Avenger. I kinda forgot what I was going to do. Anyway, let me introduce the team. This here is Bob. He does creative consulting and wears fake glasses. And then there's me, Ed. We haven't really done much work yet due to the overabundance amount of time between the submission dates and focusing on a different project as well, which we are taking some assets from, like this level here. Anyway, guess I'll just show you what I've got so far. On with the show. My process for creating a video basically starts off with CryEngine, where it also ends. I come up with an idea how to execute said idea, and I start executing it step by step. Along the way, make a few test videos to see how it looks on screen, and at some point I finish, record the final product and edit it all together and add some sound.
Originally I was going to use CryEngine, but due to the limitations between CryEngine and the assets Star Citizen used, I decided that I would be better off using a program I was originally familiar with, which is called Blender. I like it because, in my opinion, I think it's the best free open source software there is out there. There is like an open community and plenty of tutorials given on like how to operate it, and I've actually found a website called blendswap.com. It's very handy. They got plenty of assets. Some of the assets I used actually came from that website. That was very handy. So yeah, if you've gone through this path before trying to get Star Citizen assets into an animating software, you would notice that it's not very easy. Like, it's not where you just like open a file and the whole ship is there, voila, it's there. No, that's not how it works. So like if you go into, I tried looking at Star Citizen files, like hoping maybe it would just be there, but all I saw were these like not very nice looking .pack files, just blank, like just a blank image or of symbol on it, and there's like a list of that, like objects 1, objects 2, objects 3. It's like all in pieces. I realized that how Star Citizen assets work is they take all that pieces and put it together into one ship. That's how the files worked. So I needed to figure out how to get all that done. So I was looking all over how to get the .pack open. That wasn't too hard. I used a software called 7-zip, which basically opens up files like .pack and turns it into like a CryEngine sort of format, like .cgf, CGA. And from there, it's still not exactly compatible with the animating software I'm using. So I need to find out how to convert CGF into my goal format would be .obj, which Blender accepts pretty well. And I eventually, on Star Citizen forums, I found a program called CGF Converter, which basically converts CGF files into .obj files.
If you're a complete beginner and you want to start off with this sort of work, you're best off trying first to import the Star Citizen assets into 3ds Max or CryEngine 5. And there are various methods on this found on the forums or the internet. And eventually, if you start off with CryEngine, you could find a whole lot of documentation online on their wiki. Most difficult thing to finish was definitely the particle effects, mostly because of bugs, but also getting the effect I wanted on screen and actually having it somewhat realistic, as in the particle, the speed of the projectiles coming out of the Avenger for instance, or the explosion, or the little bits of the Retaliator flying off. It's the little things that matter.
When I import it, it doesn't have any textures. Like, it's just like, imagine the ship, but it's blank white. You don't have any textures on it, like you see in the white box phases in the video CIG makes. Another issue was, like I mentioned earlier, things are all separate. So I got converted, but the issue is it's in parts. It comes first, majority of the hull, then maybe the turret or the cockpit. I had to get all that together. What I discovered was that if I kept everything in place, just import, 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 like hit the import button for each file again and again and again, just keep in the same position. It sort of starts piecing it together, and maybe like here and there I have to move it to where I think it is.
Okay, so the hardest thing we getting set up to begin the project, it was just figuring out what to do. The very first thing I'll do is I will draw sketches. They are very crude sketches. Someone else would not be able to understand them, probably, and from there I would kind of decide what assets will I need. You know, I'd be sitting there looking at, I don't know, if there's a shot where the engine kind of expands into an exploded view, and that's probably a good example. Like, I'd look at kind of my rough, you know, fairly crude sketch, and I'd think, okay, I'm gonna need the core engine part. I'll need I'll need the parts from the nozzle. I'll need to break them down. I'll need a couple of hinges, a couple of pipes, and a couple of compressors and turbines. And then from there, I kind of assemble it. So the biggest challenge really was getting all the assets I needed out of Star Citizen, because I don't know the names of most of them. To begin with, it can be a real pain to do it, and setting them up can take quite a lot of time. So the biggest challenge was kind of working that into a way I can use it quite effectively. Another big pain was just managing time, but I think that's not really relevant to this question.
To start with, I collect the assets from the game, and then I fix the UVs, then texture, and then rig the characters I need. I also model some of the elements which is not found on the game. Then I animate. I do blocking first and then finalize my animation, but unfortunately in this commercial I just did a little of the animation and was not able to really finalize the animation for it, but it's I think good enough for me.
Then the next task after that was texturing. Unfortunately, like Star Citizen assets for the object, the textures are also pretty hard. They are in like .diff files, which unlike CGF wasn't exactly as easy to convert. I had to for like .diff to like .png convert. And I managed to find it. The issue was though that some points like it kind of had to compensate by putting like maybe a little purplish color to some of them, and also a lot of the textures were all in one picture, like all over, jumbled all over the place. In Blender, one thing I found difficult was taking only a portion of an object and putting that texture. If I, like for example, put the Aegis logo on it, I import, okay, done, yay. But then you see a big stretched Aegis all over the hull. I'm like, that's not what I was looking for. So I came to realize that that wasn't gonna work. All but one, which would be the hull textures, those sort of came in one picture. I was able to manage to make that look somewhat good, and maybe manually add a reflective sort of look to it in order to make it sort of look somewhat like a hull, because it just looks like a cartoon sort of hull. So I had to make that look more realistic manually. But other than that, the textures were all done by hand. So yeah, I managed to hand texture. It doesn't look as good as what you'd see in Star Citizen, but that is because Blender isn't as strong as software in terms of the video quality as you'd see in CryEngine. I wasn't really able to add in any fancy lights and stuff, except for those lens flares you see on the wingtips. That I was able to find from off a video on YouTube about making lens flares. The second difficulty was the afterburner effect. That was a pretty big hassle. You would see in the other animations in the competition where it's like this realistic sort of rocket effect. Unfortunately, it's a bit more difficult for a Blender to be able to make that sort of effect. The effect I ended up having to use didn't really look that realistic. It was basically kind of looked like rectangle sort of coming out of the engine, looking like sort of plasma. Could have been better, could have been worse, but that was due to the limitations of the software I was using and my experience combined. Another tool I used is called Camtasia. Originally it would be sharp switching angles of the camera sort of thing. I used Camtasia to turn like into more of like a soft fading sort of thing that you see in CIG's commercials, and also at the end where like other commercials have like consult ship dealer for yada yada yada, or like in hangars now, or that sort of thing, like the outro and smooth transitions. Also, what I used Camtasia for was to improve the FPS, because one mistake I did make was I accidentally left Blender in 24 FPS, and I couldn't change it later because I already had all this assets that was connected specifically to the frame that I was using.
Then I do the lighting after, adding the effects like dynamics, fluids, cloth. Then I render my work. Then I take everything to After Effects and then composite everything, do some color correction and additional effects. Then I lock the shot, bring it to Pro Tools and do music. And then that's it. If you're referring to the project where I started working on it, it would be the fixing of the UVs for the Retaliator, because I need the surface texture of the Retaliator to look good, because it's my main product to showcase. The dynamic parts of my commercial is difficult also, because I need to tweak the right settings for it to achieve the smoke fire effect that I want, and also the lighting is difficult because you have to be consistent throughout the scene and not just color correcting everything in better that beforehand in Maya. When you render, should be like almost final, or commercial took like month to testing.
Usually what I'll do, I'll start with just the core shot and only use like low resolution versions of what I've got, so it's easier to animate. And from there I'll just build the shot. I'll bring the main subject in, which is usually the Merlin. Put that in first. Set up the camera. Set up the camera rig, which is just a couple of controls I can use for easily changing the position and where it's looking. And then I'll set how it's going to look at the start and how it's going to look at the end. So thinking about the shot where the P-52 launches, it starts off kind of looking at the P-52 in the constellation dock, and then it ends with a P-52 in the distance with like a kind of a planet below. So I'll kind of set where it's going to start and end, and then start animating in the middle, that bit. And then once I've kind of got the animation that I want locked in, which can take a few hours, because it's all done by hand. But like once you get the hang of it, it's quite easy and it's actually really fun. So once I've done that, I'll set up the lighting and everything else I need. So for example, lighting, fog, ambient occlusion, which is like kind of darkness in the corners, because the way light bounces, it gets darker in the corner. Stuff like that. And then I'll switch over to the kind of high res asset I've got, which is like I've got a Merlin that's got over 1 million polygons. I don't know how I managed to do that, but it looks very smooth. That's all I know. So I use that as kind of my final one. Because at the very beginning we weren't entirely sure what to put in the end, which is kind of like a little montage section, we did the start first. The very first thing I did was kind of the hangar shot, because that was the most simple. I believe there's 4 of them. There's one where the doors open, one where it reveals the ship, and with Radlock's narration. There's a third one where it shows the lasers, and a fourth one which kind of pans from the side of the ship round to the back, and the engine explodes and then it collapses back together. Personally, I live stream because it gives me a bit of motivation if people are watching to actually do something. What I do is I open up Notepad on my computer and I just write a little to-do list on what I need to do. So it can be like to-do list, import a scythe, and then make the engine effects, and then add some additional effects that you need to, and then just kind of take them off as you go. That helps a lot with anything, not just this stuff. But the biggest tip I can give to anybody, and this applies to anything, is plan ahead. Get an idea on what you're doing before you start. That way you can go into it with a clear idea on what you want to do, and it'll be a lot quicker and a lot easier. And if you think something can look a bit better, you'll have a lot more time to do that as well, so you can be a bit more creative. But yeah, plan ahead and give yourself deadlines, and you'll be fine. When kind of finishing an animation, the truth is, like with regards to pacing, which is probably the biggest thing, the pacing is set at the very beginning. When it's initially written, it was written to some music, so the pacing was already there. And when we went through the project, we iterated it. Each shot was iterated about 4 or 5 times. It went from nothing or a black screen with a bit of text to crude sketch to a white box to maybe between a white box and a final thing. So it was like a version that I wasn't that pleased with, and then there was a final shot. So with regards to finishing an initial shot, the biggest concern I had was whether or not an effect looks good, and how I can use different parts to kind of complement. Like there was one effect I did, which was I used a lens flare and a particle system. So the particles are kind of like the engine effect, the engine exhaust effect. And what I did, I used a small lens flare over the top of that to kind of give a better sense of it's glowing. It's really hot. Whereas, in other cases you might just use a flare because that's all you really need. In some instances, like there's one where I only used that because that's all it was really required. The lighting's all done pretty much the same way. For each shot, there's 3 main light sources I use. There's the primary light, secondary light, and what I call a rim light. So The primary light is like the main light source. It can be a star, it can be, or it can just be some random light from somewhere. It doesn't really matter, as long as it's believable. And the second light comes from another direction, and that kind of creates almost like a two-tone effect, or softens any shadows that are there. And then the rim light comes from kind of behind the subject you want to light. So for example, the Merlin, it will come from the other side of it and kind of shine on the top and kind of create this kind of rim, so it kind of stands out from the background a bit more.